Have you ever wondered why the Indian past seems to be a critical analysis of a dark past in comparison to the modern world? That's because the inquiry to the Indian past was started by the British colonial historians during the Raj. Their agenda was not merely an inquiry, but also a criticism that would justify their rule. Here we have a white man's burden theory come in. The idea that Indians along with Africans, Native Americans are uncivilized and they need to be educated and civilized by the quote-unquote father-like British, who are of course also investing British capital in what was their largest market, India, but also they were here to help us grow and improve ourselves from childlike amateurs into civilized citizens. When they searched for India's past, they couldn't find any history. Indians, they argued, had no history at all, no historical consciousness, no texts except for Kalhana's Raja Tarangini, which was a minor exception showing the idea of space and time. Beyond that, Indian ideals of time has always been cyclic, they argue, the yugas, Satya, Treta, Dwapar, etc. The genealogies or the chronicles in the Purans, which were studied for understanding the rulers, were ignored in discussions of general history. They could not understand the history or the chronology embedded therein. For them, thinkers of enlightenment that we see in case of Europe, from Erasmus to Hobbes, were absent in India. In the colonial research, we had two strands of historians: the Orientalists, like William Jones, Henry Colebrook, Charles Wilkins, H. Wilson, etc. They believed India had a glorious past, but was desecrated with Islamic invasion. This past knowledge should be cultivated. On the other hand, the utilitarians believed in a welfare state where the majority will should predominate over others. In their case, like in the case of James Mill and Thomas Macaulay, the study of English, which was the language of the majority of the rulers, the ruling elites, that would benefit the Indians in their version to develop themselves, to develop the prospects of employability and others. Now let's come to the Asiatic Society of Bengal, which was established in 1784. One of the pioneering scholars, William Jones, in the Asiatic Society talked about the monogenesis of many of the world languages, Old Latin, Greek, Persian, Sanskrit, Celtic. These had a common origin, the Proto-Indo-European language. This also suggests this would lead to a century of intense research and excitement on the Aryan language theory, which is largely misconstrued as a race. It suggests that all these religions had a common ancestor language. So this connects us Indians with the British, with a common race. This research in the Asiatic Society of Bengal led to a great deal of scholarly debate on the nature of Indian civilization. Herder, Williams, August Schlegel and others were writing on the Sanskrit Vedic past. A new Oriental Renaissance, they believed, would relax the European focus on discipline and rationality. A prospect of common origin for both Europeans and Asians was constructed with, a horrified reaction amongst many racist officials, but it fed into intense research. Indian scholars responded with a sharp focus on the existent criticism of the colonizers. They were emboldened by this research, by the new prospect of a common race. They were repealing many European allegations on the backwardness of the Indian culture. From the 19th century, the innate superiority of the Europeans was once again stressed. The Orient was seen as a decadent place, as a place which used to be glorious at one point of time, but now they have been decaying because of whatever reasons. Islamic barbarous invasions, by the stagnance in the Indian cultures and religion. The discovery of the Indian history was through the Sanskrit literature, the first fallacy, you must note. We can understand how it failed to show the overall society. It merely was confined to the ideas of the upper male Brahmin elites. Their idea was judged as an omnipotent truth, which was far from the case, as we know. What Manu wrote in his text was not what all the stratas of the society thought or wanted themselves to be represented as. It was not the viewpoint of women. It was not the viewpoint of other castes. It was the viewpoint of the upper elite Brahmin male. Another misconception that these Sanskrit texts caused was an Indian preoccupation with metaphysics. So the British thought that everyone in India were yogis and saints with peculiar abilities. Hence, the spiritual East, this concept came up. Everyone in the East are yogis, they can do magical things. So looking into the utilitarians, Mill gave us a threefold division of Indian history into a Hindu, Muslim and British past. The root of the current communal reconstruction can be traced here. The fact that we now compartmentalize our history into a bunch of religious standards, the root of this evil can be traced into the research of these British closet historians, as Rajendralal Mitra calls them. The Oriental despotism, or the system of Asian governance consisting of an absolute despot, was said to be characterized of Asian societies. Such societies featured isolated, self-sufficient villages whose surplus was creamed off or siphoned off to the despotic ruler and his court. They were governing through an autocratic bureaucracy. The king controlled irrigation, on which of course agriculture depended. The surplus of this system was inevitably going to the ruler. Peasants were not owners of land and were always suppressed. This system was stagnant and was inward looking. It didn't leave any incentive for the peasants to invest. You see, there is a subtle criticism of the socialist order that we can see here. They were lauding capitalism, where individual investors could pay on various investment projects because land belonged to them. Property was not belonging to any particular individual. But in the Indian and the Asian economy, argued Karl Marx and other scholars, it was not the case. The despotic ruler owned everything. The tillers of the soil were all vagabonds in this version. You can understand how absurd this is from the mere recounting of this fact. This was the British utilitarian notion of Asian economy. Actual inquiry would show this was quite never the case. Land always belonged to the tillers of the soil. So, Asiatic mode of production of Karl Marx shows a similar theory, although with a little more nuance than these scholars. Max Weber's study on Indian religion shows us the link between caste and religion. The genesis of caste was shown from the regulation of kinship, and marriage or occupation. So the problem in these constructions lies in their emphasis on the watertight aspect of caste. So we are not saying caste was not there in the Indian society, but was it true that caste was, all pervasive, or there was no mobility within the castes? That's not the case. Caste was always fluid. A Brahmin male used to always get married to a non-Brahmin female. And what do you call the child of such a union? Was it a Brahmin, or was it a Kshatriya, or a Vaishya, or a Shudra? So such questions has to be always pondered upon when we study these monologues of the scholars. So it was not that social action was always absent and caste was never a unitary thing in the Indian society. It was always characterized by constant mingling and intercourses. The study of Sanskrit and Indian ethnography fed into the eugenics or racial sciences. Race was an European invention, argues Romila Thapar in her book Early India. So Thapar claims the survival of the fittest to be an absolute European import. It was used as a justification for imperialism. The colonial empires they made, that is, the vast empires they had built across Asia, Africa, America, they needed some justification for that. Justification was the fittest would survive, and therefore the racial sciences come in. The ultimate stage in the Enlightenment teleology, I must say, was this proliferation of racial sciences. Max Muller, a prolific scholar in Sanskrit, introduced the Aryan invasion theory. He also introduced the superior race and the language of conquerors theory. So basically what happened was, in India, the indigenous Dasas and Dashus were defeated by the victor Aryan race, who introduced their superior language there, and they could win because of their superior race. This was even Max Muller. In a later work, Muller had overturned this theory, but by then eugenics was a common currency, so it didn't help much. Now recently we can see the Hindutva ideology has claimed only the successors of Aryans were the true Hindus, not even the indigenous pre-Aryans. But the Harappan civilization's excavation, which started from 1920s, it negates this linear history. It shows that there was an ultimate proliferation of a very glorious civilization in the northwestern frontier region, which was not allied to the Aryan culture. It preceded the Aryan culture, had a material culture of its own, and it had no link whatsoever to the Aryans. Therefore, the conjecture that almost all civilizations of the East or of India was belonging to this Vedic Aryan culture, it has been duly negated by research and excavation. Now, the Aryan race theory fell apart in the 20th century. A plethora of nationalist historians like A.S. Altekar, R.C. Dutt, U.N. Ghoshal, K.P. Jaiswal, Him Chandra Rai Chaudhary, R.K. Mukherjee came up. They started negating the British allegations and speculations that these racist theories were legitimate, and they started a new nationalist reconstruction. They highlighted the role played by Indian teachings of ahimsa, non-violence, etc., republicanism as well, seen in the Gana Sanghas as contributions of India to world history, and the ancient past was shown as golden. One British scholar whose contribution is really recognized as a glorious one actually is A.L. Basham. He authored The Wonder That Was India. Let's come to the Marxist history, which showed a paradigm shift from the linear historical debates from 1950s onwards. So this is taken from Romila Thapar's book. So the writings of D.D. Kaushambi, it had shifted our focus from a strictly dynastic to a social and economic history. His introduction to the study of Indian history, it even criticized Karl Marx's Oriental despotism. He highlights a pattern of change that existed in Indian society through all the stages, thereby challenging the utilitarian's idea of a stagnant Oriental society. He says Indian society was always characterized by change. He analyzed the feudal mode of production and distinguished between feudalism from above, when the ruler was strong, then feudalism was imposed from above, and at other times feudalism was from below, where a hierarchy of land-owning intermediaries existed. So these two kinds of feudalism was unique to India in the opinion of D.D. Kaushambi. Kaushambi argued that the 5 stages of production that Marx has talked about, it can't be followed exactly in case of India. Rather, a dialectical model with 2 or more stages in each epoch, it constructing one. Such is the complexity of Indian society. So no one stage of production can be strictly followed in case of India. In India, each epoch was rather a mingling or the modifications of more than 2 versions. Now, we have 3 models as you can see on the screen: the transition model, integrative model, and the sedentary model. The transition model was a shift from earlier states to empires, which can be located in the use of iron, production of an agrarian surplus, and beginning of administrative control. This period is roughly during the time of the second urbanization, the growth of the 16 Mahajanapadas. Subsequently, the integrative model is a post-Gupta phenomena. This era saw the integration of the pre-state societies to a monarchical model. So what happened was, the Gupta rulers like Samudragupta, who called himself Prachanda Shashan, he basically went to different parts in Dakshina Patha and Uttara Patha and different other parts in central India as well, conquering smaller chieftains. These pre-state territories were integrated into the Gupta Empire. This is the integrative model. The segmentary model, which is the third model proposed by the Marxists, it assumes a separation of ritual and political hierarchy. This is where the king is not deriving his power from a theocratic order. Rather, these are the lineages which determine the identity of decent groups. So this model places a lot of importance on the progeny and the recurrent rise of the view of how important political dynasties were. This is also allied to the caste consensus, the Brahma Kshatriyas. A Kshatriya father purified by a Brahman mother gives rise to an ultimately fit progeny. That's the central aspect of the segmentary model. A separation of ritual and political authority, where societies are characterized by a pure lineage determining the identity of decent groups. There are other explanations of segment